Pressing the magic button. There we go. Well, cool. Well, wonderful. Welcome everybody today to our Publishing with Small Presses panel. Say that 10 times fast. And we're quite an informal group, so I'll let our panelists introduce themselves, and we'll just start with whoever's on the top of my Zoom grid. So Ingrid, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let us know about your life, your book, fun facts, whatever whatever you want.
Fun facts. I don't know. Whatever, 4 o'clock on a Thursday, I may be relatively low on fun facts, but it's nice to be here. I'm Ingrid Kariotis, and I teach at Sierra College. I also work in the Writing Center there. And my book of poetry came out in 2019. It started with The Wild Horses. And I'm one of the organizers of the Sierra Writers Conference, and we're actively organizing for the next conference, which will be at the beginning of February. We're super excited about that. And what else? I love to write poetry. What else can I say? I also write essays on occasion, and yeah, there it is in blurb format.
Awesome. Welcome, Ingrid. Thanks so much for joining us. And then let's see, next on my grid is Judie.
Hello, Judie Rae. I taught with Ingrid for a few years at the college before I retired. I saw her the other day running on the trail. So yes, we keep in close contact that way. I have a couple of poetry chapbooks out, yes, with Finishing Line Press as well. And I have a novel, The Haunting of Walter Rabinowitz, that Iven published with his publishing house. I also taught with Iven for years at the college. He said he was interested in publishing some women's fiction, and I said, hey, I have a book. And he said, I want to publish this. So I'm most grateful to him. Yes.
Cool. Well, that's a good segue to Iven. Iven, please introduce.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Iven Lourie. I have to say mostly what I'm doing now, because of teaching 2 classes at Sierra College. I'm just trying to figure out distance learning. And it's taken over my waking and sleeping life, unfortunately. But thank you for that compliment, Judy. Yeah, I have an imprint, like a very, very small press, Artemis Books, and I would like to have a longer list of books and have more, both men and women authors and so on, but I have little or no capital and no marketing department, and no publicity agents, and so it's a little bit marginal, I guess I would have to say. But anyway, I got into publishing and editing, actually, from working at the Chicago Review when I was a college student in back in the previous century. In the 60s, and that was a really good initiation for me. And so off and on, I've been around publishing, and I've been working here locally with just a couple of small press publishers doing mostly nonfiction books. And actually, I'm working right now with, if any of you know Lee and Glenn Perry, they started the Samadhi Tank Company, built the first commercial float tanks in collaboration with John Lilly, and they're quite elderly now, but they're just about finished with a memoir writing about their whole history in the float industry, the float movement and the float industry, starting in the 70s, late 60s and early 70s. And that book is called Floating in Quiet Darkness. And the great thing about that is there's a ready-made market for it. There's a whole international network of float centers, and these people Glenn and Lee are icons. They're like they're like superheroes to all the people in this industry, and so everybody's anxiously waiting for this book. So that's a kind of what would you call an exception to what I'm usually working with, which is cool. niche markets and fringe subjects.
It's funny that they were the first people I floated with. Actually, I have a big float tank person, so it's funny how all the worlds sort of like intersect.
Oh yeah. And when there's now a float center in downtown Grass Valley. I don't know if it's surviving this this pandemic. Is it?
Okay.
Yeah, because I need to talk to them about stocking some books actually. Anyway, and so I'm doing, I'm not because of the distance learning, I'm actually not doing much work on my own poetry and fiction. I've been trying to finish a handful of short stories for about 5 or 10 years. I'm very slow, but hoping to write more short stories.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Anyway, I'll pass.
Yeah. So I have a few questions for our presenters, and then I guess we're a small group, so we'll just open it up. And so I guess I'll go around the horn again in the same order. So Ingrid, please tell us, we have a lot of interest in the publishing world and a lot of new writers who are looking to see kind of what avenues are available to them. So tell us a little bit about like your journey as a writer, when you started publishing, and kind of like what you found in that process.
Okay. Boy, I think I published my first poem in a literary magazine in college. I finally got the guts to start sending stuff out, which, as many of you know, requires a lot of guts. So yeah, that was way back in the 90s. And then, how life is, you go through periods of time where you're not writing as much, or you don't have the confidence to send things out. And so it was a very kind of up and down process for me for a while. And then I slowly began to feel like I had enough poems for a manuscript. And so instead of just sending things out individually and sort of crossing my fingers that a poem here and a poem there would get picked up, I started thinking, well, this could maybe be a book. Though it's always really scary to use that word, it started to feel like maybe it was. And I got rejected a few times and kind of threw it under the bed, had a couple kids. And about 10 years later, started very actively getting involved in writing groups again, going through my poems, figuring out that, wow, if this has been rejected 10 times or whatever it had been in kind of its first incarnation, it probably needs some work. I probably threw half of it out, wrote a lot of new stuff, and then kind of picked up where I had left off and began sending the whole thing out, I think in the fall of 2017, I want to say. And just really talking to people, talking to local writers, doing research on the internet. What are the small presses that are publishing poetry? One of the big things for me was sort of navigating that world of the contests, which is an easy place to start, because if you subscribe to Poets and Writers, as many of us do, you kind of flip to the back and it's the contests, and then you slowly realize you're out of 25 bucks here and you're out of 25 bucks here. And so you begin to think, gosh, is there another way besides just like entering all these contests that I'm probably not going to win? And so I really just started talking to folks and looking at other people's books. Here's a nice poetry volume of someone I met at a conference, or who published it, and just really trying to understand what presses out there are publishing poetry, and particularly poetry by women. And so talked with folks like Gail Entrikin and Patricia Dove-Miller, who'd had a book recently that she'd been shopping, and found out about Finishing Line, and they were probably about the 8th or 9th small press that I sent the collection to, and heard back that they wanted to publish it. And so that was when a certain journey ended, and then another journey began, of course, in terms of picking the cover art and going through it again with a fine-tooth comb and all of those other things that happen once you've found that publisher. So yeah, it was a journey of many years with many ups and downs, but I was really, really thrilled to get that sense of something being finished. The way that it doesn't feel when you have that manuscript that just is sort of kicking around, not only literally your bedroom, wherever you're sort of stuffing it, but it mentally is taking up a lot of headspace. And I find there's just that wonderful thing of having that collection done, and now I can work on new things and sort of feel like, you don't put a bow on it. No poem is ever really done. You can always go back and revise pretty much anything. But there's a layer of something feeling like it's finished. And that was a really, really wonderful journey.
Wow. And it sounds like between when you kind of got the manuscript together, submitted it, and the whole publication process, that actually took a couple years, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty standard, especially for the small presses. They don't tend to have a very large crew who are working on things. And so, yeah, I think it was about a year and a half or so, from acceptance to actually holding a book in my hand.
Wow. And if you don't mind us asking, how many rejections did your book get before it finally found its home?
Well, it's hard to say, because if you count I'll count the first incarnation and the second incarnation. It was probably about 20 or so if you counted both of those. Somewhere in that, high teens, maybe 20. And I considered that lucky. I mean, I had my seatbelt on for, what was it? Dr. Seuss, House on Mulberry Street, I think was 75 rejections, if I'm remembering that right. So yeah, I had the seatbelt on. I consider 20, I consider myself very lucky.
I'm actually surprised there's that many markets for poetry manuscripts.
Yeah, there really are. Once you start digging around, there really are. And frankly, there's a lot of places that have open reading periods. And that's what you want to find out about. All that money going to contests, absolutely. If you've researched a press and you think, wow, my work is really a good fit for these folks, but to just sort of be blindly entering contests, you're out of a lot of money really quickly. And so much better to just query a press, find out when their open reading periods are for manuscripts, and take that route. And then maybe that there's a $3 reading fee, maybe it's free. And there's a surprising number, given how many folks say they don't like poetry. There's a surprising number of presses that do publish it.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. So we'll go on over to Judie. And Judie, please tell us about your publishing history. I know in the bio you submitted for this event, you've had quite a long history of publishing.
That's because I'm old as dirt. See, so.
I didn't say that, Judie.
No, I did. I started publishing in the 70s, late 70s, 80s. And I was fortunate enough, Kim might relate to this, I had written a 12-page spoof of a teenage romance. And I sent it to Andrea Brown. You may know her, well-known, she's a friend of mine, a children's agent when she was just starting out. And she sold it. She sold that book twice. First for it, my title was I'll Love You When the World is Fixed. I think that long ago. And the title ended up was The Boyfriend Blues. So the little girl plays the oboe. So that's where that came from. She sold it first to a teenage book club, and then Dell picked it up. And then I had a 3-book contract with another group. So I was writing teenage romances. And at that point, I thought, I want to be, not that teenage romances aren't fun, but I wanted to write something of a little more depth. That's when I went back for my master's. And through that process, I started writing for a few years. I wrote gardening articles for a magazine called Family Food Garden, and those were work for hire. So I was paid well, like $500 an article, but they had, as you know, work for hire. They owned all the rights. So, and then it just kept evolving. I wrote a college thematic reader, Rites of Passage, that was used in colleges throughout the country. And then I started with the poetry chapbooks, and then the novel. I had written this novel years ago, and then the Me Too movement appeared, and I thought, you know what? I've got that book that maybe will speak to women. I hauled it out and rewrote it extensively. And at some point I gave it to Iven. So that's the history there. the last thing I wrote was a column for the Union about higher education is not a process of indoctrination, which irritated me to no end. You know, sometimes we're spurred on simply when we see red, right? So.
Wonderful, wonderful. And that's a good segue to Iven. Iven, I know that you've published a lot of your own work and then started your press. So please tell us a little bit about kind of the evolution of your work there and why you decided to start your own press.
Well, I haven't really published a lot of my own work, but yeah, I just had the idea. Yeah, I wanted to publish writers that I know and some of my own work, and I just haven't. It's because of juggling, I think, too many things, which I tend to do. I haven't built up, a catalog. I haven't built up much of a list. I mean, my impression, about small press publishing is that you have to establish a niche. You have to create some kind of a presence or a what you call it, a branding, let's say, or pick something out that sort of characterizes your press. And actually, the way that Artemis Books came about was that a colleague of mine, some of you may have known Lily Nova. She died some years ago, but she lived here. She moved here from New York, and she had quite the career. She was a fashion designer in New York, and well, anyway, I won't go into detail. It's unfortunate that she didn't get to write a memoir. She was starting to work on a memoir about her life. But she got the idea because she had gone to college with a woman, I think it was a college roommate of hers, Karen Lewis, had been as a child interned in Manila in the Philippines, in Santo Tomas, for something like 3 or 4 years during World War II. In other words, her parents had been raising her out on a plantation, or they were involved in some kind of business there in the country in the Philippines, and then the Japanese invasion came and they rounded up all the Americans and interned them. There was something like 3,000 people for 3 or 4 years in Santo Tomas internment camp in the center of Manila. And so what Lily did was she got her friend knew several other people from that period, survivors of that, very traumatic experience. And so we put together, Lily gathered up 4 different women's accounts, and it's called Interrupted Lives. Actually, I forget the subtitle. I should grab a copy. But anyway, so that was the first book that we did under the Artemis imprint, and it actually has been. It's still in print. I've kept it in print. Lily has passed. Actually, of all of the 4 women who wrote, whose pieces are published here, and Lily and myself, only Karen Lewis is still. She's a very fine painter. She lives down in the Santa Barbara area, somewhere down near. Maybe San Luis Obispo or something. And so she's still going strong as a painter, and I see her every once in a while. She still gets copies of the books from me and promotes it here and there. But the idea we had, actually what Lily and I had proposed to do, which would have been a good project, and we didn't quite have the energy or the whatever, the stick-to-itiveness to do it. We wanted to put together a whole volume of women's narratives from World War II. And Lily actually collected some wonderful manuscripts. And then we spent so long trying to gather up enough material and figure out how to put this book together that I told Lily, we better just send these manuscripts back to these various women so they can, offer them elsewhere. And I certainly hope some of them publish them. But it was really fascinating stuff. And I think that a lot of this material has been published there. I think there are a lot of collections now of women's memoirs from the war, but it was a very interesting subject because there were stories, the home front stories, women who were 17, 18, 19, 20, and so on, like in New York or Chicago or Los Angeles during World War II. For them, it was like a brave new world. It was like, all these doors opened up and they could get whatever job they wanted, and they were getting tremendous pay, and they were having adventures and all this. So there was some really interesting stuff going on there. But anyway, that was the beginning of Artemis Books. And then I just thought I thought, well, this is a good idea. Why not publish some women's history and find some women writers? And, you know, I do have, I don't have the manuscripts lined up, but I have several poets that I hope to publish. And anyway, I haven't. It's slightly dormant. You know, I have a website, but it's interesting how that works. I don't sell any books off of my website. They all sell through Amazon. Everybody buys on Amazon, because as soon as you put out a book now, then Amazon puts it up for sale for a third off. So why should anybody buy it from your website? You know, that's what I find is going on with printing and publishing. You have to, it makes it a little bit punishing. You have to price, you know, I find, depending on what kind of printing you get done for your books, you have to price them. You have to keystone the printing cost at least 4 times, 3, 4, 5 times, because otherwise, when, you know, you're lucky if you net out 30 or 35% of the retail cost by selling books on Amazon. By the time, you know, Amazon gives you takes 50 or 55% off in order, and that's why they can sell everything for such a deep discount. And then, so you end up, you know, you have to be able to live with what distributors and jobbers and Amazon and everybody nets back to you from the book sales. But anyway, you know, I actually, I'd like to make the comment I wanted to make, Rachel, was that from the time that I first worked at a national journal, at the Chicago Review Literary Journal, what I remember from that period when I was first writing and sending out poetry, what I learned from being sort of on the inside of the process is that the most important thing was networking. You know, we would have people, writers would tell other writers, for instance, to send us, you know, to submit poems to us at the Chicago Review. And people would send us poems over and over again, and then we would start writing notes back to people saying, you know, this is really interesting, can you send us some more? We can't publish this, but what else are you doing, and so on. And we, you know, once these writers got in correspondence with us, and they had, let's say they might have been a particular editor or a particular reader at the journal that was encouraging that writer, you know, you basically develop a relationship, and then you end up publishing that person. And that's what happened a great deal. And then, of course, for me, because I was on the inside, I actually never published a thing. I can't remember whether it was part of our protocol or whatever, but I know other editors that I work with publish their own work in the Chicago Review. I never published a thing in the Chicago Review, and in fact, I've still never been published there. I figure maybe I should send them. Well, actually, I'm hoping to send them some stories, see if I can get a story in there, because I'm an old alumnus of their, you know, a veteran of their publishing history. But I did, because I was in correspondence with other editors when I was at the Review, and in correspondence with all these writers and so on. So then, you know, I had basically, I would have people solicited me and said, would I submit, did I have any poetry to submit to them, and so on. And so I'm, you know, and Rachel, you can speak to this. I think, you know, I'm much less familiar with the kind of digital, you know, the networking that's going on now, through the digital media, through social media, you know, through whatever, posting things on YouTube and on websites, and, you know, whatever this, I'm not really up to speed, I think, on it. But I think that there's probably still, to some degree, this is still valid. In other words, Ingrid, like, you know, Finishing Line. Did you say you heard of Finishing Line Press from some other poets who were published there?
Yeah, Gail
Yeah.
Brandeis has a collection out with them, and I had
Yeah.
heard her read at
Yeah.
the Sierra Poetry Festival and flipped over the book, and I was like, oh, Finishing Line.
Yeah, there you go.
I'll check
See
them
that? Yeah,
out.
that's the way you find. Yeah, the way you find things out. And anyway, I don't know what more. I don't know what else. I don't know what else I should say. Rachel, if you have any questions for me, you can ask.
Yeah, well, you know, I think what's really special is that we have both the publisher and the publishee with us, you know,
Mm-hmm.
Judie and Iven. So I was
Yeah.
hoping to talk a little bit about, you know, what it was like working together to getting Judie's book published. And I know, I guess, like, Judie, your opening kind of, like, your book release kind of coincided with COVID a little bit, so maybe it was a bit anticlimactic a little, but yeah.
It was unfortunate, the timing, but I wasn't alone in this. Writers and artists are suffering this same fate, and we have to use this time for other projects, I think. I will tell you that I had an agent years ago when I first wrote this book, and she said, I think I don't know if the problem is it's too literary or too small an audience, but she couldn't sell it. And then so Me Too came out, and I had given it to Iven, and he said yes, he was interested. The first thing I will have to tell you is that I know Iven to be a man of conscience and responsibility. And I think that when you're working with an independent publisher, you really don't know, I think. And I felt confident that I could trust him, that I was in good hands. So going forward with him was, in fact, a pleasure. It was pretty easy on my
Yeah,
part.
well, thank you, Judy. I appreciate that plug. I mean, it's sort of like, what we did with Judy's novel is almost like a form of samizdat publishing, guerrilla marketing or something like that. I mean, the fact that you can print on demand, you can create, once you create a camera-ready book, a PDF, a print-ready PDF, and a cover, and then you can just about, you have all different options for printing, and this print on demand is a terrific option because the publishing I've been associated with, we used to have to launch a book by printing 1,000 or 2,000 books, even for a small press. And then what happens is you end up with, especially let's say poetry books. I mean,
Mhm.
you end up with 500 or 1,000 books in your garage. I mean, the authors ended up with books, or the publisher ends up with, actually, I'm still dealing with this, is that we have this one press I'm working for, we have books in the storage. We're trying to clear out a storage unit. We still have books, some books that were printed in 1978 and 1983 and so on, and it's because at the time it was like, oh, you want to get it for $2.25 a unit. Well, we print 5,000 books. And then you'd either borrow the money, or you'd do the equivalent of, what's it called now, crowdsourcing. You get a bunch of people to each chip in $500 or something like that, and you buy 5,000 books. And then the trouble is, it's amazing. I mean, by persisting, some of those small presses, we actually, some of those editions we sold through 5,000 books, but it literally took from the early 80s until till almost 2020 to sell through the original printing of a book. But this print on demand thing is great. I mean, I actually think that Judy's book came out, I think it looks quite good. I like the cover. We had a very accomplished artist work on samples, of cover designs to show Judy. And I think the cover is very expressive of the book. But, I should also mention that I think the reason that I said to Judy, have you got a publisher for that book? I heard her read a chapter at the Women's Writing Salon. And so that is an example of networking, even though Judy and I taught together and so on. But when I heard her read a chapter, it broke me up. She had me laughing out loud from this one chapter that she read. And I just thought, well, this is definitely worth publishing. So,
Yeah. Judy's book is hysterical.
yeah. And I actually thought, I don't know, Judy, Judy has nice reviews on Amazon. She's building up reviews on Amazon, but I really think it does align with the Me Too movement, and just seems like if we could get one breakthrough of some kind of a national publication to review it or something, then there might be more action there.
Yeah.
But it's well, anyway.
It's fascinating to get the history of the, that you've been in the publishing world for so long, that like I can just imagine this giant storage locker of like these old books that like you had to buy in such quantity. So that's really fascinating. And
Yeah, well, yeah.
oh
Go
yeah,
ahead.
well I want to just bring it over to Ingrid real quick. And I know a finishing line is a very interesting press. And I think, we were talking a little bit about crowdsourcing. I think that you had to either do a Kickstarter, or maybe it was you had to get a certain amount of people to buy your books. I forget exactly what it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they print up postcards for you and you send them, and basically it's just a pre-order process. So as soon as you get enough pre-orders, they start the printing process. So it helps them get the money on the front end, so they know that you're going to be marketing and that there's a market for your book and what have you. It's a little bit stressful, but in the world of poetry, I can understand why they do it.
Right. I think you had to get like something like you had to pre-sell 50 copies or something like this.
It's 75, isn't that right, Judy? I feel like it was 75. I'm not a numbers person.
Nor I. I recall 50 the first go round anyway, that with the first book. I have to say about Finishing Line Press, when I did my first book in 2014, at that time, they would invite the authors to some place in the world. I was fortunate, my husband and I went to Lake Como for a week, and we heard Nikki Finney as author read, and it was a fascinating adventure. And some of those poets have become dear, dear friends of mine. And so that was worthwhile, plus seeing another part of the world where we hadn't been before. But all of us know that publishing is a tough way to go now. Ingrid, I'd like to address something Molly Fisk told me years ago about contests. And she said that she puts away, and this was some time ago, so I don't know what she puts away now, $200, similar to someone going into gambling and saying, okay, I have $200 to put in the slot machine, and if it's gone, it's gone. If I make money, fine. And if so, that money was gone, it's gone. But she allowed herself, in other words, that money to enter contests. So
Another Molly gem.
Yes.
That woman is filled with more gems of wisdom and advice and quirky little pieces of food for thought than practically anybody else I know. So that
handy hints.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's perfect. I'm just going to earmark this. That's my contest money.
Yes.
I'm moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I would tend to agree with you though, Ingrid. I think those contest fees, $15, $20, $25, that's a cash cow for these publishing projects. I mean, it's just a way of, it's a way of filling their coffers. I mean, I really think it's a kind of a con. I mean, surely somebody wins the contest. That's great. And I'd love to win a contest, but I think it's just a way of generating cash. Big time. Anyway.
Yeah. Well,
Have you come across, just out of curiosity, I've been getting a lot of email from a publisher back east called Black Lawrence Press, a poetry publisher. Has anybody seen their work? I'm not sure where they are. I've actually bought a couple of their books to see what they look like. It's similar to Finishing Line. I haven't gotten quite a handle on it, what they're doing, but they have several contests a year. They have open reading periods for entire manuscripts, both prose and poetry, and then they have contests with kind of moderate. The fees are pretty modest compared to a lot of other ones, but they seem to be a serious enterprise. Go ahead.
One of the things the fees do, though, is allow the publisher to pay the person who wins. I mean, that's one way of looking at it, I think. So.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to go around the horn one more time and ask, it sounds like you all are using mostly poets and writers and then word of mouth to find homes for your work. Yeah. You don't use Duotrope at all?
I use it a little bit. I think because I've just been used to Submittable, that I've just kind of stuck with that, and it didn't seem like I needed to be on both of those. But Duotrope's great. But Submittable, because it's already the platform I'm using to submit on, it's sort of an easy place to keep track of things and what have you. And they both have great listings that you can pour through and see who's looking for what, and maybe there's a theme, or maybe there's a cutoff date that you need to be apprised of, and they're just great resources.
There are two online sources that I recommend to students of mine. One is Authors Publish. Have you seen that?
Oh yeah, I'm
And
subscribed.
every week I think they have something. And another one is Funds for Writers,
Oh,
Hope Clark. And she has a paid for subscription and she has freebies. And there are plenty of contests mentioned, as well as freelance markets, as well as if you want to go off to, I wanted to say Yahoo, Yada.
Yahoo, yeah.
Yeah, Yahoo. If you want to go off to Yahoo.
The Yahoo Writers Colony.
Yes, you know what I meant. Thank you.
oh,
DRS.
wonderful. And then
What is the name of that second one? Funds for
Funds for Writers.
Funds for Writers.
Funds for Writers, Hope Clark.
Nice. Nice. Well, I wanted to just go around the horn one more time with another question before we open it up here. And that is, you know, it's probably, and I probably have a premonition of what you might say, but talk about the finances of publishing and if people can hope to make money or not. So Ingrid, we'll start with you.
Oh, don't start with me because the news isn't good. If you have a propensity for writing either fiction or nonfiction and you're trying to make money, run with those. Certainly making money as a poet, boy, I'm sure Robert Hass does. I'm sure Ellen Bass does. But yeah, the rest of us, not so much. It's in the hundreds of dollars a year.
Did you make some proceeds though from your book?
Not really, because I had to build a website, which I had to put quite a bit of money in, and I had to buy wine for my book launch. And, so once the fees, went out, yeah, it balanced pretty close to even, let's put it that way.
Wow. Wow. And what about you, Judie?
Krishna says to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, to the work you are entitled, but not the fruits thereof.
I knew exactly what you were going to quote as preface that.
And I think that says it pretty well. Yes. But that's not why we do it, really, is it? I mean, it's nice to be rewarded for one's effort, to be compensated for the time you've put into it. But I think it's so much more than that. I really do. Yeah.
But you didn't find yourself in the hole at all going through the publishing process. Did you kind of break even?
Well, I would say where's Iven? With the novel, I have some because I purchased some of my own to sell it at readings, and then along came COVID. So at this point, I don't know that I have broken even, but that will happen slowly.
Yeah, you might as well be honest, Judie. I mean, she has, rather than getting into the profit, she has an asset, which is what, like 100 of her books that we printed that are still available, something like that, 50 or 100 books. But again, print on demand is a huge boon. I mean, I was actually very resistant to it years when it was first coming on, because I felt that offset books were much better in quality than these digitally printed books. But I think Judie's book is a good example. I think now, as long as you pay a good printer, as you get a good printer and a good binding job, it's very hard to tell apart that a digitally printed book from an offset book. And they're actually the quality has gotten very close together, and the difference in price, the difference in price is irresistible. It's about scale. It's like, you have to print at least 500 or 800 books offset, to actually get the advantage of a better unit cost. Whereas with the print on demand, you can launch a book by printing 150 books, or you can actually print 75 books if you want to, or whatever it is that you need to start with. And then when you go back, the really great thing is, if you need 25 books at a time, the unit cost is not significant. There's just not a significant difference. From printing 200 to printing 20, it's like pennies. The difference, it costs you more, but only pennies to print 20 books.
Wow.
So it can be very useful. You can print 50 at a time for events when you have events coming up or whatever.
Once we can have events again.
Yeah. Well, I have with Artemis, just for example, the benefit of having a distributor. Artemis books, I got piggybacked onto another press, and I use Independent Publishers Group in Chicago, and they have incorporated, what do you call, you call that horizontal or vertical? I think it's called vertical integration or something like that in business. They've pulled a publishing plant into their business, into their warehouse. I mean, a printing plant. Okay. So they're doing the print on demand. So I can have, I can just give them the permission to print 25 books or 50 books or however often they need to. And they just keep themselves stocked. And then there's a savings of X amount, again, depending how big of a book we're talking about. I don't have any really big, heavy books, but that because that printing plant is in their warehouse, there's no shipping cost. There's no cost to get books to the distributor from the printer because they are the printer. So that's a distinct advantage. Anyway.
Interesting.
And it's a good way to go. I think Hawk and I have talked about this. Like Hawk probably has enough books, in his printing imprint that he could get carried by this, just one of these distributors, if he wanted to go this route. You have to be able to live with what I said. Like you have to price your books to anticipating that you're going to get 35 cents on the dollar back. Like on a $20 book, you're going to see $6 or $7.
Wow, it's intense, actually.
Yeah. So going back to what Judie was saying, yeah, this is you have to be devoted. You have to have a reason to be in publish. You have to be devoted to something, have some goal or aim, let's say. I think that you're pushing towards. It's not going to be commercial.
Right.
It's or very seldom. I don't know. I would say I think I've paid a couple of times to go to these big workshops, writing workshops, which purport to tell you how to succeed commercially and all this. And from the ones that I've gone to, the only talk by an author that I remember so distinctly was a woman getting up and saying, a young woman who she was on her third novel or memoir or something like that. And I can't remember her name. I should have written it down. But, she said, they're probably going to fire me. I probably won't be invited back, to this workshop again. But I want to tell you that all this, you're talking about, like reading 187 espionage novels and then figuring out the best plot and doing this and, and coming and orienting and studying your market and figuring out how you can write a book that'll sell and do all this. She said, all this is like, really, you could just throw it out the window. What you really need to do is, if you need to write something that you really care about, that you're passionate about, and you get up in the morning, and it doesn't matter if you write for 15 or 20 minutes every day, if you keep on writing and writing and writing and writing, you're going to get to what you really need to write. You're going to get down to the hardcore, to the essence of what you have to communicate. And that's what's going to make a good book, and that's what's going to make a book that's saleable. She basically said everything you've heard for the for the last 2 days at this conference is forget about it, about being commercial. And just what she was basically saying was follow your heart and write with integrity. If you have something that you're really passionate about communicating, if you have something you're really driven to communicate, maybe that's more likely to be a success than something that you strategize because it's what's selling out there. It's the fashion, or it's what celebrities are making money off of, or it's what people are gobbling up this week, or something. It's just not the way, that impressed me. I was quite impressed with what she was saying. Whether she was a very commercial writer or not, I doubt it. But, being a poet myself, I was very impressed with what she said.
Yeah, me too, actually. Me too. Well, we'll open it up, and we're a small group, so just unmute yourself and dive in, and we might talk over each other a little bit, but we'll work it out. You know, if anybody has any questions, or if you're more comfortable, feel free to stick them in the chat. And I'm happy to read them for you. Sometimes it's hard to speak up.
Well, I'm late, so
That's okay. Hi, Marta.
Go behind until you all talking, and it's just so interesting. And I almost didn't make it to the group because I'm taking care of my granddaughter right now.
Oh my God, you're here.
Yeah. But anyway, but all is good. All is good. I don't know. I have tried to think about publishing as a secondary thing to my writing. Just totally. It's there. The desire to publish is there, but it's not my impetus. If I don't write, I'm miserable. Literally, that's the bottom line. I write to retain my sanity because my brain is just constantly full of stuff. So, what I have published is not very much. I did publish, because I wanted to turn it into a screenplay, I published on Amazon a little draft, small draft of my book, Ayeka the Damned. It's about the angel. It's called The Sylph's Tale. And that's because I wanted to make sure that when I submitted it for a screenplay, I would not lose my rights. So the screenplay won an ISA third place award, but I still need to do a lot of work on it. The book sold like 9 copies, like maybe 20 copies. I used Amazon, and it was just a real incredible hardship to learn how to publish on Amazon. So I got help from another author that I did pay her publishing stuff a little bit of money. I'm kind of a chintzy person, not because I don't have money to pay, but because that's why I have money, because I'm a chintzy person. So I find that so I did publish it on Amazon, and it's got great reviews, despite the fact that it's so chopped up because it's only little pieces, little sections of chapters. It's only like 17,000 words of a book that right now is like 70,000 words. So, but it got a lot of good reviews. I was really surprised, to tell you the truth. It did just as well on draft to digital, and they're a lot cheaper to publish in. I think the big thing is, all the stuff to get it done.
Well, Marta, did you have a question maybe for one of our panelists that maybe they could help you?
I want to find out which, before you get ready to publish, what steps do you take, etc. And where do you find your sources and stuff like that?
So the steps you take and where you find your sources. Mm-hmm. And that specifically for a play, perhaps, or just for
a play or poetry or a novel, for your writing.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think we talked a little bit about poets and writers and different sources like that, but maybe how do you prepare the manuscript would be good to know. Yeah. And if you had an editor before you contacted your agent or your publisher, things like that. Ingrid, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Yeah, I had a manuscript review that I cannot even explain how valuable this was for me. I highly, highly encourage you to get in contact with an author whose work that you admire or check out websites of folks that offer these. I'm sure there's lots of local folks that are doing this. In fact, Kim, I think you're doing that right now for a friend of mine, Liz Collins. So there are wonderful people out there that you can pay to go through your book in a fine-tooth comb way that a friend is, perhaps it's too much. I mean, our literary friends are wonderful. But I think it's often a bit too much to ask, that the level of sort of fine-tooth comb editing and feedback that you need. I had just an amazing manuscript review with a poet, and a lot of what he said just really transformed the manuscript, because he was able to not take it from this poem by poem by poem kind of feedback, which is what I was used to from my writing group. He was able to look at the whole thing and talk with me about themes and layout and just a lot of things I was really inexperienced to talk about and really consider with my own work. You know, often you just can't see the forest for the trees with your own work at all. So I can't recommend it enough to do a manuscript consultation with someone whose work you like and who you trust. Maybe Kim, you could talk about doing that a little bit, since I know you do that work.
Is that okay, Rachel? I'm not on the panel.
Please.
Yeah, no, I do editing. I do manuscript consulting. Thank you, Ingrid, for that plug. That was sweet of you. And I love it because I've published 5 books. I've gone through the editorial process with different editors, both at Scholastic and at Source Books, and with a small press. Small press is where I got my start in my career, with Gail and Charles Entrican. And so, you know, I feel like I can look at a project as a whole project and like really get a sense of what it is, what the goals are for this writer, and because that's the thing, is not every book is the same. Like not every book of poetry has the same goals, and not every novel has the same goals, and not every screenplay has the same goals. And so it's all about trying to figure out what your goals are and what you're trying to do, because there's so many different avenues. And so we start there, and then, you know, I can really like unpack a manuscript and hopefully amplify the writer's vision so that we can get that book in the best possible shape it can be before you submit to agents or editors.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the advice that I've heard is you definitely want to have it edited and the best it could possibly be before you submit it, because it's just the market out there is just so competitive.
Oh God, yes.
Yeah. Oh, good.
And it's so important too, Rachel. It's so important too to know where you're putting it, because it's not just like there's all these avenues, and so it's important to know where the project fits.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Judie, do you want to talk about manuscript preparation at all, and sort of like the process you went through before you contacted publishers?
Well, working with the novel with Iven, and college English instructor, right? I thought I gave them a pretty clean copy. Judy Crow, same background, read it. Betsy Fassbinder, who's a wonderful writer as well as a therapist, read it for content about, no, Judy, a therapist would never say this, so kind of thing. So it was helpful that way. Iven read it, and there are still 3 errors in it. And it happens, I think one word is likes, and it should be liked, for example. The problem is we read for content. So I'm reading a book now, I'm 25 pages in it, by a major publisher, and I found 3 errors, you know? So when it's not so close to our heart, I think perhaps it is easier to find these. I will tell you that I had a student who wrote a wonderful memoir. He asked me to edit it. He gave it to 3 different not independent publishers, but what do you call those publishers?
Vanity publishers.
No, I mean,
No?
it's
Okay.
just a self-publishing, okay, self-publishing publishers, Book Baby, Lulu,
Mhm.
We found another one.
Yeah, right. Services.
I
Yeah.
spent, and Ivan knows this story, I think Hawk does as well. I spent a great deal of time editing it. I'm sure there were errors. And after 3 or 4 years, the book, he gave me a book. It was rife with errors. And
Well,
he,
so because the Book Baby and those kind of services don't edit. They're not
well,
going to edit your book.
I know what
Yeah.
something happened, and I'm not sure what. I think perhaps the manuscript I edited didn't get
Oh,
to
I
the
see.
third publisher.
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I've offered to help him again gratis, and I've been through this book so that I'm sleeping with this thing. And he just sent it. Maybe Ivan can address this. He sent me the PDF that he's sending to the publisher, and the publisher sent back another one, a different PDF that goes to the printer. And it has more errors again, lines that are missing. And I'll just
to make all of you feel better about this, if you find errors in your own manuscripts, Scholastic printed 14,000 copies of The Wonder of Us with a huge error in it.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the errors are there sometimes in these big books, even the big books and the small books. I think the most important thing is that you have someone who can like guide the developmental process of the book so that it ends up being a beautiful book, even if it has a little stray typo or a stray error like here and there, because those are going to happen. I mean, my poor editor, when that happened, like she's the kind of person that goes through a thing like with a fine-tooth comb like 20 times. Like she's like meticulous. And they still missed it, you know, and it just, things get missed. But I think the most important thing is that like you have the book in the best shape it can possibly be in, structurally and developmentally. Typos happen.
Yeah.
Errors happen.
Yeah, those are the nightmares of publishers. Yeah, the worst of all is when everything seems to be perfect and you're going, oh, and now we printed 1,000 books and there was a typo on the cover.
Right? Oh.
Because you didn't have somebody proofread the final cover design. That's something that often happens. But
or you did and they didn't catch it. You know?
Yeah, I want to backtrack to what Marta was asking. You know, I've been, you know, for years in various kinds of writing classes, and I don't know, just talking to younger writers than me, which is now become like most writers in the world. I think it's, especially with poetry, I think the most important thing to do is to send out your work, like what Ingrid's talking about. Send your poems out and have them published in journals, because I can remember, just as from working at the Chicago Review, at the Literary Journal. I mean, if you have a manuscript, it comes in, you're competing with all these other manuscripts, but in the front of your manuscript it says, you know, these 2 poems were published in the Louisville Review, and this poem was published in the something, and these 2 poems were published even in newspapers. These were published in online, you know, online website magazine publications, or, you know, something like Canary, like Gale Entrican's Canary, and so on. So if you have this whole list of publication credits for the poems in your book, that's something, before they even crack the manuscript, like an editor is going to look at that and say, what that makes an editor think is, oh, all these other editors have accepted this person's work. And I think that's carries a lot of weight, and that's my plan. You know, my long-term plan, if I ever get to carry it out. You know, I want to have a manuscript of short stories and send them all and get them all published, rather than just starting to circulate a book of short stories. I want to get them all published in wherever I can. You know, even if they're digital, just digital publications. I want to have a set of publication credits in the front of my manuscript when I send it out. Anyway, that's my advice. And I've even told, you know, for instance, like science fiction writers, I think this is even more important for self-publishers. Like if you're self-publishing, it almost doesn't make sense to just put out your book and then start to promote it. I mean, let's say, like, I know a science fiction writer who comes to my writers group off and on. I've told him, like, why don't you publish short stories, send out short stories and try to get them in science fiction magazines and have somebody recognize your name oh yeah, look, it's another story by so-and-so. And then you can even take, if you got novels, science fiction novels, you can take chapters. There are journals that will publish a chapter of your novel, or you just tweak that chapter and make it into a short story. This is a short story based on my novel, such and such. And I think that's a tremendous boon for marketing. I mean, it's the whole deal is like, who knows your name? Who knows of you as a writer? And, if you just have to get out there somehow. And, like I said, that was what I experienced as being a poetry editor for a journal, is that there was all this networking going on. I would see sometimes poets that we rejected for our magazine, I would crack some other journal that would come in the mail. We would exchange, we would get free copies of all these other journals, and I would crack it and see that poet published there. Sometimes I would see the same poems that we rejected published in another journal, and then I would go and show somebody else on the staff. I'd say, look, we screwed up. Like, why didn't we publish these poems when they came in here? And then you start beating your head against the wall or whatever. But I mean, it's the thing is, yeah, that you can get more, you can get a readership now. In fact, now you could get a readership by getting published on popular websites, or popular online journals and so on. So anyway, it's just a suggestion.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good one. It's a very good one. I mean, what better? I heard like the best way to promote your book is to write another one, So why not do short stories? It's a lot less work.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a hard sell. I think science fiction actually in the genres, like murder mysteries or espionage novels or science fiction. I mean, it is so packed. I mean, those fields those genres are so competitive, that I think you have to find a back door somehow if you want to actually get a readership. You have to do some research and do some finagling, or just figure out who you can collaborate with and get yourself published.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I hate to say this, but I have got to go.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, we go till 5:30, but we've covered so much material. So
I'm so glad that I did.
Good. I hope this is helpful for your play.
Incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I know I learned a ton.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's great to listen to other authors, how they've done their work and published and all that. It's wonderful.
Yeah, and definitely buy their books too. You want to support your local authors. I was part when Ingrid was publishing. I definitely was one of the people who got the postcard and bought the book.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me join. I really appreciate it.
Good.
Yeah, we have so many writers. So we have such a big literary community in Nevada County. I feel like I'm several books behind. I've gotten the emails about several people's poetry books coming out, even from Finishing Line, and I got to go and find the emails because I always chip in. I always try to buy them, pre-order them, and then I get the books in the mail when they're published.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I have a nice collection now on my shelf. So I always got like my friends' poetry with me. It's kind of a cozy thing, It's cool. It's cool reading work by your friends, I love it. Do we have any other questions for our amazing, talented writers and publishers who've joined us today? I know Lourie and George and Catherine have been very quiet. Do you guys want to say anything?
Nope, just listening to everything because I have my own press. It's a few little books, and so I published where I publish my work, so it doesn't look like just create space. So that's fairly straightforward as well. And then I'm publishing a series of books with a friend of mine that'll come out in the this month, probably in October.
Wow.
So
we've been Catherine,
yeah.
Can you what is the strongest advice you can give for marketing books like that coming out from a
well, what we're doing a whole workshop in November, and we call it Writing from the Queen's Seat, and it's a metaphor to figure out it's a fun way to figure out who your audience is. And I think that is really necessary to be very focused on where you are going to put your book. Who is going to need it, want it? Now, it's easier with nonfiction than it is with poetry, and I've published poetry books too, and I've sold two books, or your genre fiction. But I think your ebooks are super great, and if you have genre fiction, you can go into newsletters. I know Mila and I have talked about that. You can go into various newsletters and get drum up some interest. And then for nonfiction, it's spending time on LinkedIn, spending time on Facebook groups, and seeing who is going to really benefit from your book and target that. And that's how you can create that word of mouth.
Thank you. It's very interesting.
That's what
it's networking. Yeah. That's what, this is what sounds familiar to me, because like this is networking. Yeah, you do all the networking you possibly can, and then you find an audience. That's the trick, is to find a niche and an audience.
Yeah,
that you can market to.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's a great example. Actually, it's just what do you call it? Coincidence. I mean, I just happened to have been working as an editor and had these float books, flotation, float tank books come to me, and it's one of those things where it's had spikes in interest. There was a tremendous interest in the 1980s, and then the AIDS epidemic basically wiped out the first generation of commercial float establishments, because everybody was paranoid about spas, showers, and any place where they're going to share water facilities and so on. But this is like, it's not exactly non-traditional. It's a non-bookstore market. It's a particular subculture of people, and there are more books coming out about sort of related to meditation and awareness and health also, and relaxation and so on, related to floating. And there's big bucks being put into research, medical research now, on the possibility of using this float tank for PTSD and to help people with addictions and all kinds. So it may become like a very, very big item, and there may be a lot more literature. But I just happen to be with this small publisher where we got there's a book called The Book of Floating, which was published in New York by Michael Hutchison. He was bankrolled to go out and do this research during the first flush of interest in the 80s. And he was a journalist, a professional journalist, and he just wrote this terrific book. I mean, I think he spent almost a year, bouncing around the country and going to all these float centers, and he floated himself for like hours, hundreds of hours, and all this kind of stuff. And so this book, but it's like, it sells on Amazon, and it does sell in bookstores here and there. But the float centers, these entrepreneurs, the people who are in this business, buy 5-10 copies at a time. Some of them buy cartons. They have a special event and they buy cartons of books. So it's a whole I don't know, what would you call that? That's called a niche market, actually.
Yeah, niche market. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's fabulous. I mean, it makes it, it's the Book of Floating is the best-selling book for gateway books. And that's why we have high hopes for Lee and Glenn's book. Like I said, they have there are people who've been telling them for years, like, where's your book? We want to read it. We want to read about your life story. So they're finally getting it done.
That's so
cool.
Cool. Well, go ahead, Lourie.
I actually have a question for Catherine. I think I saw that you were advertising a class through the Center for the Arts. Is this the same one?
No, you saw, that's my Wild Writing Wednesdays, and that's free. It's if you're interested, just drop me a line and I'll send you the details. And it's just a free prompt. It's a free class for writing with prompts, and it's just like, it's Natalie Goldberg, Julia Cameron kind of thing.
Well, that sounds fun, but also this Queen's Seat, that sounds interesting. So is that something that you've sent out any information about yet?
We're just finalizing the information and the cost. So again, send me your email and I'll let you be the first one to hear about it, because we're doing it here locally.
That's awesome.
And it'll have an opportunity for people to come during the day for 3 days if you're local, and then people can also spend the night. we're putting it in a house with
Oh, wow.
facilities.
That's
So it should be pretty cool.
Well, cool.
Thanks, Catherine.
Well, I think it's about that time to wrap things up. I think we've gotten to the end here, but I just really want to thank Ingrid and Judie and Iven for visiting our group. And if you like, feel free to email the list. The whole list where I sent the Zoom invite. Just go ahead and email us if if you have events coming up, whatever. If you want to email the link to your book.
Oh yeah,
Feel free to do that to our list and encourage everybody. It'd be wonderful to do
Rachel, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you, Rachel. And please keep me on your list.
Oh, yeah. I usually, if people don't tell me not to put them on the list, and I just,
Thanks,
Uh-huh.
Rachel. This is great.
yeah. And just really quick, next month, we're going to do writing prompts for National Novel Writing Month, Nanowrimo. That'll be really fun. I don't think we have anything for December, so I'll poke around at the beginning of next meeting for whoever wants to do that. So if you have an idea and you haven't led the group for a minute, think about it. So you can email me.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, thanks for a great meetup, everyone. It was so lovely to hang out with you all, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Rachel.
My pleasure. Let's see. And meeting.